I think now AI experimentation like de-risks you a little bit, right? You're able to build out a test plan, get it into production. If it wasn't right, you've now narrowed down what your North Star should be. And I think the same, like the different side of that same coin is that the velocity increases, right? You're able to get to market quicker. And that's like probably the thing that I talk about too much, which is that I think in 98% of scenarios, building fast is better than building perfect. The reason that's true is that when you're able to get to market quicker, those feedback loops activate, you're able to hear from the customer, and that really allows you to validate your guesswork. Teams build faster, and they're asking better questions as a result of building faster because they know what their customers are telling them.
Welcome to Unite Voices, hosted by Katie Green. Real stories from the people behind today's most innovative experimentation programs. No fluff, just wins, failures, and the lessons in between.
Well, Akash, welcome to Unite Voices. We're so happy to have you. For everybody who doesn't know me, I'm Katie Green, Principal Advocate at Chameleon. I've been in experimentation for about 10 years, and my favorite one-liner is that I sell experimentation. So we're here to talk about the things that make experimenters excited, and one of those things is, Akash, your experience. So please introduce yourself to the group. I know you were formerly at Delta, so let us know what you're up to. Tell everybody why they should listen to you, huh?
Yeah, appreciate the intro. So, Akash Doshi, have spent the past 10 years working across commerce, retail media, and product management. As Katie mentioned, spent the past 3.5 years leading digital strategy, part of that digital strategy for Delta Vacations, which is really the leisure subsidiary of Delta Airlines, working across AI adoption, product management, building out the consumer experience. And Katie, you and I met back in February at the Chameleon conference with Gain, of course. And you and I just had a great chat. It was a great dialogue, and we thought, hey, why not kind of share some of those ideas publicly?
Yeah, we're a couple of nerds just getting our conversation recorded for the internet to have forever, which is classic. Yeah, no, it was so great to meet you in Vancouver. I know, right? Archive it forever. I'm sure there's probably clips of us chatting in that room in Vancouver. A good shout out for anybody who wants to come to Unite Summit to DM me on LinkedIn. No, but I think you have done a lot of these, right? You are very expert at talking in front of a camera, in front of a mic. And I watched your episode with Quantum Metric, and you were great at that one. You had some really good points, and so I was happy I had a chance to kind of take what you and I talked about as it relates to experimentation, but also as it relates to data, because something you talk a lot about is data fatigue and how there's a battle because people are drowning in numbers. But as experimenters, this is our whole life. So can you tell us a little bit more about the drowning in data argument you have? I think it's a really important one, because how do we balance too much data versus the right data? Would love to hear more, just because as experimenters, it's quite literally what we do is determine decisions based on data.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that was the great sort of connection with the growing space, which is AI and experimentation, right? And democratizing technical fluency. So normal folks can run A/B tests without needing this entire sort of technical stack or technical team leading that work. And so how that relates to data, I think, is really twofold. I think ultimately, folks sitting in the business, right, whether you're working in product or marketing, customer experience, we're really just trying to have better answers to questions, things that we want to solve, or we want the right information to understand what our next steps are, right? What is our vision, our game plan? How do we go about solving a critical customer problem, building that next enhancement? And the role of data, I think, the role that data is playing right now is that we spend so much time on building the infrastructure, right? Think about the applications that you host. That's either for a B2B, customer experience, a B2C customer experience. And we build out these really, really robust data layers. We have all these metrics coming in. And, my personal experience is that it's led to a lot of data fatigue, right? Is that we have so many metrics, we often don't know which ones are the right ones to really do what I was just mentioning earlier, right? Have better answers to questions, make better decisions. And I think when you kind of use that framework, it helps you kind of get rid of some of the noise, focus on the signal, and all of that comes down to like what are the right proxies, right? And so I think a lot of times people are kind of reversing the order of operations. They're like, okay, we have all this data, let's try to make sense of it. I think maybe the better way to go about that is we have a key customer problem we're trying to solve. We have a key enhancement we want to build out. Now, what are the right indicators to measure if that's a good idea or not? And then go back to the data, and you have a bit more of a focus on what exactly you're looking for. So I think that's kind of the role data fatigue's played, and how we can maybe drill down our focus on what matters most.
I want to zoom in on one piece you just said, which is asking the right question, because that's what experimenters are so focused on, are our hypotheses, right? That is a very hard thing to say. Our hypotheses, our questions are what inspire really impactful, scalable programs. So tell us a little bit more about, asking the right question, because I think you in particular have such a grasp of the right answer. But what is it to take a step back and ask the right question? And why is that so important when it comes to experimentation and data in general?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because it starts to get us into how does A/B testing solve some of the issues we see that large teams are facing right now, or even smaller teams. And when it comes to asking the right questions, I think we can just kind of build out a contrived example, and you and I can sort of bounce off that. Is like, let's think about like funnel conversion, right? You have like for example, an e-commerce site might have an intended flow that they want their customers to go through. And so, a data and analytics team might be looking at that step-by-step conversion, notice that there's a drop off on a particular page or a particular action. And so then they zoom in, right? And they try to understand, okay, what's occurring at this step in the funnel that's leading to customers dropping off, that's preventing conversion. And so that could be a variety of things, right? If it's payments page, maybe it's an API failing, maybe they're having trouble adding something to cart. Maybe the experience is just confusing, or the UI just doesn't make it clear how they can proceed. It could also just be a behavioral problem, right? The customer isn't just ready to convert. Maybe they're checking prices. So there's like all these things going on, and I think what we spoke about in that quantum metric conversation was when we have voice of the customer, we're able to really zoom in on what the issue is, right? Rather than us doing a lot of guesswork and extrapolating and saying, hey, we think this might be the issue, we're not really sure. We get a very, very firm indicator on what exactly is going wrong. And then I think the opportunity for AI and experimentation is to really optimize or kind of use that as a launch pad and say, okay, we know now what the core friction is. We've identified the root cause. We're not, kind of targeting a symptom. Now, how can we A/B test a solution to kind of confirm we're going in the right path, right? So, like, I think that whole first half is like voice of the customer, identifying the correct problem. Now, the second half becomes A/B testing is the right path to making sure we have that right solution in place, and making sure it's fixing whatever we're trying to solve, right?
No, that's great. That's exactly the perspective that I think a lot of people want to hear, because people are going to be tuning into your episode, this episode in particular, because of how much data representation you bring to the table when it comes to experimentation. I think a lot of us come from different angles. That's something really unique to experimentation is, I come from more of the marketing and growth strategy side. I was agency side for many years, most of my career. And, I'm coming from that. Some people are coming from the dev side, data, design, right? There's so many different levels to it. And I know that people are really looking for that data intersection with you in particular in your experience. But something that we struggle with in the experimentation world, and I know you have seen this in other realms as well, just knowing your talking points, and you and I have discussed for gosh, now we've known each other for 6 months. But yeah, I know it's wild. But is that it's democratizing, right? When you have so many different levels of experience with technology, even with data, it's really hard to democratize a program and bring people in so that they can meaningfully make impact without running into roadblocks. So I know you have a really good take on democratizing technology, not just the data. I want to make sure that's like a huge focus in this episode, because that's what I think what a lot of people come to Chameleon for. That's our market differentiator is, okay, with PBX, you don't have to be a dev to code this. If you're a dev with PBX, you can start part of this process and reduce a lot of the time you're spending on a certain test build. Tell us how that relates to data and what democratizing technology really means to you.
You're totally right. And so I think this kind of dovetails into the broader thread, the trend we've been seeing over the past 2 years with a lot of agentic and generative tools, which is vibe coding. And I'm going to put my preface out that I don't like the term vibe coding, but there's been some data, and I just recently made a LinkedIn post on this, which is that people are saying, hey, with the influx of vibe coding, right, the ability for a normal person who doesn't have a technical background, they're not a developer, they're not a software engineer, they're able to now build and push applications to production. And a lot of that data is pointing in the direction of like AI slop, right? The idea that we're building a lot more technology. The output has grown by an order of magnitude, but we're not necessarily building good technology. And my view here is a little bit contrarian, which is, I think you articulated it perfectly. It's not the fact that, hey, people sitting in the business can now build a full application, the back end, the front end, and push it to production. It's that they can own a greater share of that workflow. And now developers can retain focus on the things that matter to them, and we can be better stewards to our technical teams by having the power to now build a mock-up in hours rather than days, or using a generative or agentic tool to build out the infrastructure, or even just a PRD, right, like a product requirements document that gives developers a very granular focus on what exactly they're building. In my experience, one of the biggest pain points for engineers in working with not just product teams, but with the business generally, is that there's not enough definition they need to go out and build the thing that the business wants them to build. And so I think part of AI and experimentation is that it's not necessarily just that like a tool like PBX can help you launch an A B test yourself within minutes. It's that if there is a more complicated A B test, something that is a little bit more technical, we can at least push out a V1, right? We can push out the source code. We can push out sort of this infrastructure where we can now go to developers and say, hey, this is our idea. This is what we've built so far. Can we now see it through to production? Can we build a V2 of this? And so I think that's become really powerful. So if anything comes out of kind of that vomit of words I've just spat out, it's not just that, hey, you build end to end. It's that we own more technical fluency. Now we pass off to developers and their jobs are made a whole lot easier. And I think that's generally a good thing.
No, there's so many things I want to talk about there, but really quick, my dog is desperate to say hi. So
Oh, a cameo. I love it.
he says, I want to know why you don't like the term vibe coding. That's what Roscoe and I both want to know.
I think it's probably a function of connotation, right? Like, I think vibe coding has developed this stigma, is probably not the wrong word, probably a little too strong, but it's kind of like taken on this life of its own where it's like, oh, I'm just going to go into a tool like Claude Code or Lovable or Base 44, any of the big tools that exist right now. I'm just going to type in what I want and build out an application. And I think that's maybe the wrong way to look at it. It's more that people who never, have written a line of code in their life are now being exposed to a functionality that's net new to them. It's making them a little bit more technical in the process. I think generally it's a good thing. I just think vibe coding has maybe garnered maybe a bad reputation for better or for worse.
Yeah, I feel like when you have a single term for things. I do also want to underline something else you said because I think it's really important. There's kind of two pieces to it. The first where at the end you said, okay, well, when people have more access to the workflow, they're able to present a much more well thought out, lower barrier opportunity for engineering, right? When it comes to testing. I love that point because it does directly call back to an episode I did with Marcella. Were you two able to meet at Unite Summit, Marcella from Fossil? Okay. We'll make it happen next time, whether it's at Unite Paris or Unite Vancouver, whatever it is. But she, in her episode, explained she kind of uses it as a tool it's her exact quote is, "It's harder to stop a moving train," right? You have that momentum. You say, "Hey, here's like a first version of that." But what I want to build on that is that it also it frees up time to focus on what matters. So when you're not worried about coding, you're not worried about clogging up the sprints by coding a button color test, right? You can focus on things like feature flags that are really impactful to your bottom line. So I think what this all comes down to is AI is obviously changing the workflow and changing how we're working together. So I'm curious, and I realize, you and I haven't ever talked about this before, but I just wanted to get your opinion. Do you feel that AI and experimentation is allowing people to ask better questions, or are they just moving faster?
So I think both things can be true at once, which is that I think it is allowing people to ask better questions, right? Which is you have a guided thesis on the way your business should move forward or the way you want to develop a product. And I think AI experimentation is a great way of gut checking that a whole lot quicker, right? Instead of taking up 2 to 3 sprints to your point, building out a test, building out a hypothesis, launching that, and then then realizing, hey, we actually targeted the wrong part of the funnel, we built the wrong feature, this actually wasn't the right test to validate whatever our hypothesis was. I think now AI experimentation like de-risks you a little bit, right? You're able to build out a test plan, get it into production. If it wasn't right, you've now narrowed down what your North Star should be. And then I think the same, like the different side of that same coin is that the velocity increases, right? You're able to get to market quicker. And that's like probably the thing that I talk about too much, which is that I think in 98% of scenarios, building fast is better than building perfect. The reason that's true is that when you're able to get to market quicker, those feedback loops activate, you're able to hear from the customer, and that really allows you to validate your guesswork, right? Instead of saying, hey, we think this is the right path forward, when you get something into market, those customer feedback loops just tell you, like, hey, this is what they wanted or this isn't what they wanted. And so I think both things are like exist in parallel, right? Teams build faster and they're asking better questions as a result of building faster because they know what their customers are telling them.
All right, perfect. I mean, like I said, I truly could not have said that better myself. It is two sides of the same coin, the velocity and getting those market indicators that really move the business forward. So, this is why, again, I ask you these things and I don't say them myself. So, great job. I love to hear it. Something else about it is what we call, you and I have talked about this, the tax, the administrative overhead when it comes to testing and how much time you work. You kind of touched on it when you're talking about de-risking, right? It's kind of like an external de-risk of, okay, yeah, you didn't go with this feature, but it's also AI and experimentation is drastically reducing the cost of building a test, launching a test, whatever it is. So can you tell us a little bit more about the administrative overhead and how AI is really playing into the overall experimentation workflow?
Yes, and I think the best way to answer this is by way of example. So, if we take a sample digital team today, the way the process might go is something like this. You're in a monthly performance review or a quarterly business review, and you see a particular metric or KPI that looks a little off. The teams dig into it. You start to triage, hey, what's the root cause? What's driving this? Okay, now how can we fix this? At that point, the experimentation team might come in and say, okay, we think this is the problem. Let's build out an A B test or an ABC test or however you want to split out that audience to see how they interact with two different experiences and see what the winning one is. And I think all of those steps take a significant amount of time. For a normal team that's balancing multiple work streams, it could be 2 to 3 months between identifying that pain point and actually getting something out into production. And I think AI and experimentation helps speed up that pipeline considerably. So a lot of that administrative overhead around identifying the problem, figuring out the solution, and then actually developing and launching that solution now gets condensed into this 1 to 2 week period where if your team has the autonomy to say, okay, data and analytics have identified a key customer pain point, we think we can test something out. Now, before you even go to product teams, before you go to engineering, before you have them build and code out a solution, you can actually launch something that helps you validate that much quicker. And the ability to get to market, to our earlier point, speeds up. And I think that just saves people a whole lot of time. I think anyone who leads experimentation or A B testing within a digital org today knows how long that backlog is. And as a result, when you compound that 5 or 6 times, what ends up happening is you have a giant backlog of great hypotheses that you want to test that never make it to market, right? They just kind of sit in purgatory. So I think the ability for AI to now insert itself in experimentation allows you to clear that backlog, validate, a gut feeling you have about the way you should build a product, the way your customers behave with your product. And so I think it helps reduce a lot of that administrative overhead, that admin tax.
I think that's what I tell a lot of people, right? It's a different way, but I am going to start to pepper in some of your talking points. Is that overhead is what slows you down, and then you're missing really critical impact. So 100%. I think we could keep this episode 50 minutes, but to spare everybody, us included, let's get to my last question. I asked the same question of everybody, just kind of based on what we've talked about during the episode. And it's all about what I call the Monday morning advice. I realize it might not be Monday morning when people are listening to this. It's Monday morning for us right now as we record this. But what I mean is, what's the tangible takeaway? And in particular, you do such a good job of operationalizing your AI usage. I think a lot of teams are struggling with, whoever the higher power may be saying, use AI. And they're like, okay, how? Or, okay, I'm vibe coding these things. They're not actually that powerful. Like, what do I do here? So tell us a little bit about, when it comes to AI, how do we meaningfully implement it into our workflows and not just let it be another complicator in a chaos factory?
You're probably the fourth or fifth person just in the last couple months who I've spoken to who echoes some version of that sentiment, right? Which is that enterprise is telling teams, hey, adopt AI in your workflows, but there isn't a meaningful blueprint on how to do so. And so then getting to the root of your problem is let's have a guided POV on the place where using AI meaningfully helps the business, right? So things that come to the top of my mind are the content supply chain, right? Smaller marketing teams have always had an issue with producing creative at scale. I think AI has an obvious opportunity there to create versioning, to create new assets, and help you again deliver at a quicker sort of clip than what exists traditionally. With product managers and engineers, AI can now review your source code, right? Or if you notice a defect, logging a defect is no longer like, hey, this button's breaking, go fix it. You can actually dig into it yourself, have AI use computer use, go through the dev tools, go through your logs, figure out the issue. It can write out the full defect for you. Now engineers are actually surprised when you hand them the defect written up because it has so much context and granularity. They're just able to action and solution on it so much more quickly. And so I think there's opportunities like this where it helps you narrow your focus. So when digital teams are told, hey, go use AI, use it to make yourself better, they now can actually understand, okay, these are a set of different problems that when I encounter them in my day to day, there's a guided POV on how to use AI to actually help me and not to just kind of spin my wheels.
Yeah, I realized that wasn't the original question I planned on asking you on this. I obviously, to everyone listening, we have a conversation before we record this about what we're going to talk about. But in that last one, we're talking so much about AI, and I know you have done an excellent job of leveraging it. It's just like you said, so many people lately are coming to me and they're like, my boss told me to use AI, and I'm using ChatGPT, I guess, and Gemini and Claude. I'm trying to code variations, but it's not meaningful. What do I do? And I'm like, oh gosh, I really am not the expert in this, but I try to elevate the people who are. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective, because I know you have a lot of impact and experience in this field. With that,
Yeah. We could probably have a whole separate episode on I think the exact pain point you've mentioned, which is that how do we take work streams that people actually, engage in on their day to day and then insert AI in a way that's meaningful and not just, this is actually creating more work for me, not less. But another topic for another time.
I know, sorry, you'll have to tune in to part 2 that we record in another 3 months. Okay, great. Thank you so much for being on Unite Voices. I appreciate you, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me, Katie.